What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Today is day 2, January 2nd. So hopefully you guys had a good first day of 2021 and you're ready to just jump right in to what we're doing, which is a yearly walk through the Bible, reading the entire Bible cover to cover in 1 year. So yesterday, yesterday we read the first 3 chapters of Genesis, and it was pretty cool. Like I said at the end of yesterday's video, today we're going to be reading chapter 4 and 5 of Genesis, and I just want to jump straight into it. Because I've seen a couple things. I've already read through it. I just finished reading it before I hit record. And there's a couple things in here that are kind of cool. Again, something that, we've heard a lot about. Chapter 4 is the story of Cain and Abel. And we know the story. Cain slew Abel, and, it was because they both made sacrifices. They brought sacrifices to God. Cain brought sacrifices of basically vegetation, and Abel brought a sacrifice of his the first yearlings of his lambs, basically it says it's kind of crazy, kind of ironic, and something that I didn't really notice before, but I guess now, like, going back and reading into it, the very first mention of a sacrifice in the Bible is Cain's sacrifice, in which God was not happy with. So not only is it the first mention of a sacrifice, it's also the first sacrifice that was basically, like, denied. It was the first one that was rejected by God. And it's kind of interesting, because you hear about sacrifices in the Bible, a lot, but the very first one we hear about was rejected by God. And we don't really hear about God's it doesn't give reason to why God rejected it. But if you read, in verse 5 of chapter 4, it says, "But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell." So basically, he didn't accept Cain's sacrifice, and he basically was kind of mad. He was angry, and it just says he was very wroth or angry. And in verse 6 it says, "And the Lord said unto Cain," basically is like, "Why are you mad? Like, what are you upset about?" And he goes on and says, in verse 7, he basically says, "Will you be accepted if you do what is right? But if you refuse to do what is right, then basically watch out. Sin's crouching at your door. And, it's eager to control you. But you must subdue it, and you have to be its master," basically. So as I'm reading it, it's almost as though Cain's anger reaction, is rejected because of the sin in his heart, not the nature of his offering. And then it's not, to me that kind of says, if he was making sacrifices because of that's what he was supposed to do and that's what he wanted to do, it may have been a different story. But it's almost to me as though he was just like, well, I got to make a sacrifice, so here you go. And God was like, no, I'm not going to accept that. Like, this is something that you should want to do, not something that you're forced to do. And he basically said, just why are you mad? And it was kind of almost like an answer, like, instead of being mad, there goes the cat again. He's probably going to be in every episode, guys. But anyway, so in verse 8 of chapter 4, Cain was like, hey, Abel, let's go out in the field. And it says, Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, and he killed him. And it's kind of, if you think about it, it was something that demonstrated premeditation. Cain waited until they were, in the field, and then he killed Abel where there was no human witnesses. And just like in the Garden of Eden, here comes God, and he's like, hey, Cain, where's your brother? But if you remember the last video when we were talking about the Garden of Eden, he was like, hey, Eve, what'd you do? He already knew, though. And I'd never thought of this. And this jumped out at me tonight, and it was kind of cool because having yesterday's reading still fresh in my head, he said, I don't know, am I my brother's keeper? And we've heard that before. We've heard, I am my brother's keeper, or, whatever. It's a saying that is pretty well known. But I started noticing something that kind of ties together with the Garden of Eden. God made, and it says in the first couple chapters that we read yesterday, that God made Adam the keeper of the garden. And now Cain is saying, am I my brother's keeper? Like, kind of a weird coincidence. But unlike Adam, he never confesses his guilt. He never says, oh, I killed him. Whereas Adam was like, I did eat of the fruit. And it goes on to say that God says that the voice of your brother cries out to me from the ground. It's kind of a pretty powerful statement. It goes on and it talks about the curse of Cain, and he's basically going to be driven out of the land, and Cain goes and dwells in the land of Nod, where Cain has a wife and has a son, Enoch, and then it kind of jumps into the last couple verses of chapter 4, and pretty much all of 5 is going over the descendants of descendants, which you would think, it's kind of boring. But being that I have some knowledge of what goes on in the future, I found something that was kind of cool. Verse 5, or chapter 5, excuse me, says this is a book of generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. So it goes through and it says, Adam lived this long, and he had a son, and then he had another son that he named Seth, and then he lived a little while after that, and then he died. And then Seth had lived a bunch of years, and then he had a son named Enos, and he lived a bunch of years after that, and had other sons and daughters, and he lived to be this old, and then he died. And then Enos lived a bunch of years and had another kid, and then he lived some years after that, and he died. And it goes on and on and on, and then it gets to Enoch. And I thought it was kind of cool, and we'll, in some of our future videos, we're going to learn why it's cool. But it says in verse 24 of chapter 5, it says, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." All these other descendants, it says, he lived this long, and then he died. And then he lived this long, and then he died. But with Enoch, it says, he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Remember that. In fact, I don't know what I did with my pencil, so never mind. But I'm going to mark it because it's kind of cool, and we're going to see. That was my dog whining. But the rest of 5 is, like I said, basically going through, and it ends with Noah and his descendants. But it hasn't really gotten into the story of Noah yet. That's coming up. So, overall, I think that 4 and 5 was kind of cool. 5 was cool because you get kind of a preview of what's to come. But in 4, it really goes into the story of Cain and Abel. And it's kind of interesting because it talks, Cain dealt with, jealousy and anger, and, he didn't have a hold of it. He didn't have control over it, and it cost him pretty big. So I think it's kind of cool that, God's showing, even in kind of a harsh story, that we need to have control over these things. And it's not easy, but it's definitely something that God expects of us and God wants from us. So it's definitely something for us to work on. That was the cat again. He's a little destructive. So we are going to call it there for the night. Verse 4, verse 5, or chapter 4 and chapter 5 was pretty cool. For tomorrow's reading, these videos are probably going to be around this length. Yesterday's was a little longer, about twice as long, because we had some introduction to do. But for tomorrow's reading, it looks like we're reading Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8. And again, I'm going to leave a link to the 1 Year Through the Bible devotional. So if you want to follow along and you want to know what's going on, you can go grab one of these. They're on Amazon. Not too expensive. The link that I left yesterday, it was for a everyday study Bible, but it doesn't look like this one, because the one that looks like this one, for some reason, was not the same translation that I'm using, which I'm using a King James version. just because that's what I was raised with, and so that's what is my go-to. But I'm going to leave a link to both of these again in the comments below. So if you need a really good study Bible, because it was actually the study Bible that I saw the correlation between my brother's keeper and Adam being the keeper of the garden in. So having that study Bible is pretty cool because it goes into a lot more than just the devotional. So again, if you need those, go grab them from Amazon, and I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Thanks for walking with me, and would love to hear what you guys think about Genesis chapter 4 and 5. So leave me a comment down below, and make sure you hit subscribe so you can follow along. This is going to be one video every day for a year, reading the Bible cover to cover. And so far it's been really fun, and I really thank you guys for hanging out with me and reading along. So tomorrow, chapter 6, 7, and 8 of Genesis, and see you guys tomorrow.